In the late 60s, I think a lot of young Americans were searching for who they were in various ways. And I went off to spend a year in Japan, not explicitly with that effort in mind, but once I got there, or I should say maybe when I got back, I realized that I had been on my own personal quest when I went to Japan. I think I had thought of it at first as an adventure, something kind of external to myself. But somehow, when I was in Japan, in a very, very difficult time to be American and be in Japan and be in a Japanese university where, frankly, the student activists on the Japanese campuses made the American activists look like wimps. And they held me accountable for my country in ways that no one at home ever had, because I had identified myself as part of the opposition. And suddenly I had to account for being an American and being an American in Asia, where every other day something would happen. An American aircraft carrier would come in and leak oil and destroy the fishing industry of an entire island. An American jet would crash in a schoolyard, kill Japanese children. American military presence was everywhere. The Vietnam War was right around the corner. The students of Japan were serious radicals. And I found it excruciating to be an American in Japan. And I spent maybe the first 3/4 of the year there trying not to be American. Japanese would come up to me and speak to me on the street. I would answer in French. I tried to outdo my Japanese roommates in all kinds of Japanese ways of being Japanese. We'd have contests who could sit on their feet the longest, who did the best tea ceremony and flower arranging, and I was in there. I wanted to learn the language right away, so I never had to speak English. I couldn't bear to be associated with being an American in Japan. And the year I was in Japan, I had decided I was going to dedicate my life to studying Asia and become a scholar of sorts or journalist or whatever, focusing on that part of the world. And yet, everything that happened, I was asked to account for. Martin Luther King was killed. I was in Japan. I had to account for that. Robert Kennedy was killed. I had to account for that. The Vietnam War escalated. I had to answer for that. The Japanese press would call up looking for Americans who could speak Japanese, and I had to explain things from the American point of view. I had never done that. I had never imagined it possible for me to do that, having always been in the opposition. And when I returned home, fully planning to major in Japanese history or something like that, I found myself somehow mysteriously drawn into studying all about American culture, this quest to figure it out. If I spent a whole year trying to not be American and it didn't work, I had to figure out what it meant to be an American, living in the times that I was living, and hold myself accountable for that. And I think if there was a professional turning point, the time I would have died if anybody had even mentioned that I was anywhere near a career decision or anything that mundane. But certainly I found myself drawn to studying and learning more about American culture, American history, American society, to figure out who I was in all of this. And being in Asia during that year was very transformative, because it wasn't the counterculture, it wasn't the sexual revolution, it wasn't the drug scene that was affecting me in 1968. It was being an American in Asia and having to be accountable.